Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Ukraine's War Crimes Office says more than 10,000 civilians killed since Russia's invasion began. Ukraine's President Velmazielinski says Kiev hopes to hold peace summit this autumn. Plus, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says neither Putin nor Zelensky ready for peace. Thank you for joining us. Approximately 10,749 civilians have been killed since, and about 15,599 others wounded in Ukraine since Russia invaded the country in February last year. That's according to Ukrainian authorities. Yuri Belousov, the head of the War Crime Department of Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office, said the death toll includes 499 children. Speaking in an interview with the news agency Interfax Ukraine, he says, in his words, once Ukraine's occupied territories are liberated, the number of those killed is expected to increase many times, adding that the figures of the Prosecutor General's office are similar to those of international organizations like the United Nations. Last month, the UN reported it had confirmed the death of more than 9,000 civilians, including over 500 children, but the real number is expected to be higher. Belousov also said his team have recorded 98,000 war crimes committed by Russian forces in Ukraine during the invasion. Russian drones attacked and damaged port and grain storage facilities in the south of Ukraine's coastal region, Odessa, in the early hours of yesterday, setting some of them on fire. Video released by Ukraine's Operational Command South showed fire crews working on site of damaged port infrastructure in Izmail, Odessa region. Izmail is a key port in the Danube Delta, from where Ukrainian grain is taken by barge to the Romanian Black Sea port of Constanta for shipment onwards. Ukraine's Danube River post became a vital lifeline for Ukraine's grain exports after Russia left the Black Sea grain deal in mid-July. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry has said that Ukraine's naval drone tried to attack a Russian warship escorting a civilian transport ship in the Black Sea. A day earlier, the ministry said it had thwarted attacks by Ukrainian sea drones on its navy and civilian ships in the Black Sea, confirming that the warships destroyed the drone. Kyiv has previously used drones to target Russia's navy base in Crimea and the bridge that Russia has built to the peninsula. Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, and Kyiv has pledged to recover it along with other territories seized by Moscow after it sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in February 2022. Authorities across Russia have reported a string of attacks on military enlistment offices, blaming them on phone scammers, according to state media reports and social media images verified by authorities. In one incident on August the 1st, authorities detained a woman who tried to throw a Molotov cocktail at a military enlistment office in the southwestern city of Stavropol. However, there were no casualties, according to the region's governor, Vladimir Vladimirov. Russian state-run RIA Novosti also reported that in St. Petersburg, a woman was detained on the night of August the 2nd after trying to set fire to the door of a military enlistment office. Now, a photo posted on social media and geolocated to a military enlistment office in the Kozminki district, southeast of Moscow, showed its door on fire after what appeared to be another such attack. Video of the aftermath also showed the scene cordoned off by authorities, with the same door no longer in flames, but with severe burn marks. Some Russian media reported the fire started on Tuesday after a 62-year-old woman threw a Molotov cocktail at the office. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the policy of the West and Ukraine is to destroy everything Russian. During a meeting with members of his government, President Vladimir Putin spoke about the 4 annexed regions of Ukraine, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, and integrating them into the Russian cultural space. Now, President Putin said in his words, strictly speaking, the inhabitants of these regions have never left this space. They carefully preserve both their native language and a keen interest in great Russian literature. I know they love the works of outstanding compatriots, and this is despite all the attempts of the current Ukrainian authorities to ban the books of Russian classics, contemporaries, to withdraw them even from sale from libraries, or even more so to destroy them, as they and their Western masters dream of doing with everything or anything, doing away with everything or everyone who thinks, talks, reads in Russian. The Russian leader added that the 4 regions have returned home to their native bosom. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said he hoped the Ukraine Peace Summit could be held this autumn, and that this week's talks in Saudi Arabia were a stepping stone towards that goal. Mr. Zelensky told Ukrainian diplomats in a speech published on the president's website that almost 40 countries will be represented at the meeting in Jeddah on August the 5th and the 6th. President Zelensky and his team are working with allies to build broad support for a peace summit that will endorse principles to underpin a settlement to end the war started by Russia's full-scale invasion almost 18 months ago.
This is already the second meeting, and almost 40 countries will take part in it. The first meeting was in Copenhagen, Denmark, and the third step will be the organization of the summit, the Global Peace Summit. We are working on making it happen this fall. At the summit, which needs the presence of the majority of the world, and where the world's majority could be present.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said he hopes a Ukraine peace summit could be held this autumn, and that this week's talks in Saudi Arabia were a stepping stone towards that goal, as we have just reported. And meanwhile, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said his country is working for peace in Ukraine, but neither President Volodymyr Zelensky nor Russia's Vladimir Putin are prepared to talk peace. The Brazilian leader has tried to form a group of neutral countries to get peace talks going. He's been criticized for saying that Ukraine and Russia are equally responsible for the war. President Lula said during a foreign correspondents' news conference, the BRICS group of emerging economies should allow new members if they meet the requirements, such as Saudi Arabia.
Brazil is in the role of the countries that are trying to look for a road that allows us to use the word peace. For the time being, we haven't heard that neither Zelensky nor Putin have the idea of, oh, we will stop, let's negotiate. For now, they are in the phase where they say, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win.
The British Foreign Office has announced the appointment of Nigel Casey as the new ambassador to Russia, amidst rising tension between Moscow and London. Mr. Casey succeeds Deborah Burnett, who held the post since 2020 and will take up the role in November. Last month, Moscow announced travel restrictions for British diplomats working in Russia. Now, officials, with few exceptions, will need to notify authorities in advance about their movements around the country, outlining their planned itinerary in detail. Moscow said the measure was in response to the hostile actions of London, such as hindering the normal operations of Russian foreign missions in the UK. Now let's talk to Mr. Yin Kao Yenichi, International Affairs Analyst, who joins me virtually from East Midlands in the UK. A very good morning to you and a warm welcome to the program.
Good morning to you, Mr. Macaulay.
The latest comments from President Vladimir Putin say that the West wants to do away with all things Russian and accusing Ukraine of being complicit in this regard. We brought this up on the program yesterday. It's a good opportunity to reiterate that concerning the removal of the Russian emblem from the great statue in Kiev, it's not even in their country. And it's not what for instance, the pyramids are to the Egyptians, or the Eiffel Tower is to the French, or even the Statue of Liberty to the Americans. But it seems to have hurt, or it seems to be hurting President Putin, that the Ukrainians are indeed trying to eviscerate the country of everything Russian.
All right, so that's hardly surprising. Okay, and then for the first time, I just watching your news this morning, it occurred to me again that what President Putin is trying to do is to restore the old Soviet Union. I mean, both countries have had relationships as well as neighbors. They've had relationships for many, many years. And then at this point, Ukraine is thinking, we can do better for ourselves. If you look at the whole outlook, it's more of, if you like, re-engineering powers across the globe. Sovereign nations want to be independent. They want to be able to determine their sovereignty. And then, of course, there are the old, if you like, power grabbers who still think that the old course should be maintained. Putin needs to push through that narrative to Russians to say that we've always had Ukraine look up to us, like the rest of the nations around the corridor, and that at this point they can't lose that hold. That's why it's been annexing cities upon cities, and it's had this carefully thought out. It's the only other thing that an average Russian would look up to when considering the president. Why should President Putin remain in office? So sell the propaganda that we can't afford to lose our territories, and then, of course, on the basis of that, distract them from otherwise a leader who should have been retired by now. So Zelensky also needs to continue to assure the citizens that I'm the president for this time, to be able to allow you a seat at the table with respect to global powers. And that's why it panders to the West as much as possible, including NATO, so that as far as it's concerned, Ukraine can reach its potential. And if you look at the aid that have been coming to Ukraine in the last over 500 days, then Ukraine can sufficiently say that it's increased its armament, its military work, and that is also a subject, a force to be reckoned with, if you like, so that if any part of the world, any bloc, including the West, would need to engage Russia, China on the side, then it will be Ukraine leading that charge. So Ukraine is a reason for so many power sharing and reordering across the world. So it's hardly surprising that Ukraine will want to remove anything Russia. That's the whole essence in the first place, to say that we are an independent people, a sovereign nation who can take on the course that we think best for our people.
Do you think, therefore, that this inference, from what he's saying, it infers that he's trying to whip up popular national sentiment on the part of the Russian people for his efforts in this war, by saying that they want us to disappear, how dare they interfere with this issue between two neighbors?
There's no doubt about that. Look at what Russia has gone through recent times, and it's almost embarrassing to say the least, because right there, I believe, my personal opinion, that Russia is possibly facing an insurrection at its infancy. So you have attacks that I don't believe are possibly sponsored directly by Ukraine. This set of Russians who believe that power must change hands in Russia, they believe that Putin must lead. But Putin is saying to them that I'm the leader for the moment. He needs many more of his citizens to join the military. It's the Commission Wagner assimilated the few of them that he can, sending the rest of them to Belarus. So at this point, to justify his continued hold of power, he must whip up that sentiment of national patriotism to say that we are the ones under attack. And he keeps committing so much of Russia's Commonwealth, if you like, so that he cannot even abandon the war at this time. If they are thinking of even changing president, if they think that Putin should relinquish power, they will think of the investment into this war. They've lost men and women, they've lost their military wear, they've lost money, they've lost, their economy is in shambles. So it's a very bad situation for the average Russian at this time. So all eyes will be on trying to end the war, regardless of how patriotic they want to see. But this is one of the few last cards, if you like, that Putin can play at this time to increase his support at home and then to be able to justify his continued hold on power in that country.
There's been much discourse and even think tanks, if you will, about how influential President Vladimir Putin is in his country and why he gets the people to follow him as they do. And that is not removed from the fact that the post-Yeltsin, post-Gorbachev, post-Yeltsin era led to the Putin era, where Russia gained a lot of economic stability and military superiority. And it's been said in circles around the world and inside Russia concerning the Russians that the Russians feel safe with President Vladimir Putin in spite of the tactics or measures that he uses to remain in power. Now, finally, on the issue of his subject, on the subject of him having this support from his people, which he needs to continue to prosecute this war against Ukraine, you said just now that you see the semblances of an insurrection. Is that really plausible, given how dogged the Russian people are to support their president and to support the nationalist ideology of Mother Russia?
There's no doubt that we are getting there. The bottom will soon fall off. The ruble in Russia, Russian currency, nobody is trading in it at the moment. All right, the export that they are able to do, those have been wiped out by sanctions. So you ask the average Russian, what next? What next? What do they expect? The economic stability that you talked about, Russia has had to share with China at the moment, and also the West, and right now even Ukraine. That's part of the reason why they have the Green Deal. So Russia isn't as economically buoyant as it used to be. Even in the academia, we are reluctant to conduct research with Russians. Russians have been shut out with respect to research into science and technology. Now, that is embarrassing for the average Russian. But at the moment, the only other issue that Putin can galvanize, in fact, is one of the reasons why he actually invaded Russia, is to be able to keep a hold on power. Okay, so he annexed Crimea, and then, of course, we had those missing flights and then shooting down planes and all of that. But he has Iran in his corner. He's got China in his corner. At the moment, there's absolutely nothing else. Russia has lost potentials that it could have otherwise built up upon over the time. So the insurrection is clear for everybody to see. How many drones attack have we witnessed in Russia in the last 2 weeks? On my fingertips, I can count at least 3. They are losing many people, are throwing cocktails. They don't want many more soldiers or citizens to be enlisted. They have to bring out septuagenarians to join the army. So it's lost manpower. It's not so popular anymore as it is. And that's why everybody is muting peace. None of these two nations will wholeheartedly say that they are ready for peace. They also have that propaganda to say we can win the war. But we all know, like I said the last time when I was on the program, both nations and many other countries of the world are now stretched thin as a result of this ego fight between Russia and Ukraine.
The impression you're giving, the backside of your comment just now, presupposes that Russia is losing the war. But even the NATO commanders have said that it will be a great misunderstanding to underestimate Russia. That even if you think that they have not prosecuted this war in the fashion that they wanted or with the speed that they desired, that they are still a power that should be reckoned with. And if you take them for granted, then that's a miscalculation.
I agree with you, and I anticipated that question. I have not said that Russia is losing this war. Why would Russia lose the war that it's fighting in its neighbor's backyard? Russia has not been invaded. Russia has not had any missiles shot at it. So in a sense, I don't think that it's Russia that is losing. In any case, where are the casualties? The casualties are Ukrainians, They've lost lives. I mean, where do they start from in trying to rebuild Ukraine? So Russia hasn't lost the war. Russia hasn't lost anything at this moment because Russia started the invasion. However, Russia's personality in the global space has taken a huge hit. There's no doubt about that. Russia is losing with terms of economic development and economic wherewithal. Nobody wants to talk to Russia at this time. Russia has been ostracized. So on that basis, we can say that Russia has committed costs. This war has come at a cost. Has Russia lost? I don't think so. Is Russia losing the plot? Yes. Is Russia losing the war? No. Russia is not losing the war at this time. It could maintain what it's doing for the next 6 months, 1 year, and then the situation remains the same. As much as possible, NATO still restricts and restrains itself from going to full-blown war. And Russia, Putin understand this. So they keep doing what they can do, knowing that no one is going to hold them more accountable than it is at this time. They still have some economic powers to be able to display. So no one should delude ourselves that Russia is losing this war. Is Russia stretched thin? Very much so. Is Ukraine stretched thin? Of course, very much so. We all have to consider our budgets as we go into the new year. With regards to increasing our defense expenditure, UK has to be thinking about that at this time. US is going into elections, has to be thinking about that. NATO and EU also. Poland is already having to move its own troops to the borders. Those are expensive, but we will not delude ourselves that it's a loss at this time, okay? As far as Russia is concerned, Putin is serving his purpose of remaining in power, and that's all that matters to him at this time.
Let's turn our attention now, Mr. Yenichi, to disturbing facts and figures. Over 10,749 civilians killed, according to the Ukrainians thus far in this war. Over 499 children killed because of this conflict. About 15,599 wounded because of this confrontation between both countries. President da Silva of Brazil says both sides, in spite of this, do not want to come to the negotiating table. He's placing as much blame at the door of the Ukrainians as he is at the Russians. Is he correct?
There's no doubt about that. Is absolutely spot on. Now, the war has several implications. We are sorry. I feel terribly sorry about the lives of the Ukrainians, which will never remain the same. There are children who grow up in a war-torn country, and all their childhood will be about war and the memories. So, I mean, that's sad enough. There are people who will never complete their education. Their destinies that have been changed, including Nigerians that have had to return from tertiary institutions in Ukraine. It's never going to remain the same, not in our generation. That is a fact. It will take between 20 to 50 years to rebuild Ukraine at the very minimum. So the world has changed forever in Ukraine. However, talking about the casualties and whether both leaders are ready for peace, I don't think they are ready for peace, really, because there are some factors to consider. And I think that we should talk about that for a minute. Number one, Brazil too can come to the table to discuss at this time because it knows it's a catalyst for bringing this war to a close. Whereas before now, Brazil also went into elections and tried to encourage the rest of the world that they are ready to build their economy and to trade. So it's a point for Brazil to come to the table to discuss, just like Belarus as well. Poland will also seize that opportunity. The same thing for Sweden. So this is the time when nations hitherto not talked about will come to the table and try to provide solution. So Brazil is trying to discuss itself into reckoning. That's number one. Number two, for this war to end, then we must allow Russia to take some cities. And that's the last thing that Putin will be ready to do. Crimea in particular has to be returned back to its sovereignty. And this has been happening since 2014. Putin will not do that. He would never cede Crimea or any of those cities. We have to again discuss movement on the Black Sea and then to look at the airspace over the Baltic and all of that. Those are conditions that Putin will never negotiate about. Ukraine on its own would say a total withdrawal of Russian troops. And then, of course, prosecution of Putin himself for war crimes. Ukraine has lost so much. Who's going to be responsible for rebuilding Ukraine? Whereas some economic sanctions that have been meted against Russia can be lifted against its oligarchs and all of that, those can be achieved. But the major ask that these leaders will present at the table will make it impossible for us to be discussing peace. In fact, one other important factor is the fact that Zelensky himself will claim that except Russia withdraws, he doesn't want to come to the table to discuss because he won't cease repelling attacks to leave himself open for Russia to take more territories. So where does the ceasefire come from? We have to start by saying, can we ceasefire for some time before we start negotiations? That is difficult to achieve.
Finally, in the hit movie The Godfather, there is adapted from the Mario Puzo book. One may recall where it was asked why they didn't have a wartime consigliere, a wartime lawyer, a wartime counselor. President Velmazielinski is a wartime president now. And from being an actor slash comedian slash entertainer to be thrust into the limelight in this fashion, he's had to punch above his weight, so to speak, given his antecedents, because you cannot compare, neither by age nor experience, Zelensky to Putin. In this situation that he's in, as the head of the Ukrainian people, led to lead the charge, just like Winston Churchill did, of Great Britain in World War II, are you impressed with his performance thus far?
So the first thing I'll say is that it takes a human being to be able to achieve greatness. Whatever knowledge, whatever skill that you have acquired is just secondary. Well, I'm a Christian, and the Bible tells us that God himself decreed dominion for Christians or for man everywhere. So I don't think that the fact that Zelensky was an actor or a comedian made him any less of a leader. I think that leadership starts from within each of us. It's an option that you have to take. Is he a man of courage? Yes. And I think that nobody should consider entertainers or those in the entertainment industry any less serious about what their pursuits are. Now, of course, if you look at California, we had an actor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, being governor, and he held his own there. So everywhere all over the world, I think that we must understand that it only takes to be human to be able to achieve greatness if it's your choice. Now, I think that we should salute the people of Ukraine who looked beyond antecedents to be able to elect a leader, almost as if they were prophets looking into the future. And that's what has happened. So it doesn't matter whether we think that the person has a garnered public service experience before the person can bring leadership to bear. As Zelensky brought that very much so. Conversely, let me tell you what could have happened. Even if we had an experienced leader, the experienced leader would have negotiated away some parts of Ukraine. And that's what Putin was expecting. And that's why he brought in, held sham elections, and then brought in mayors for those cities that he claims to have annexed. I think that for somebody who has shown patriotism to stand his own and to be able to take advantage of this opportunity, because the figure will appear even minimal of casualties right now, because a safe passage was given to millions of Ukrainians to be able to flee the country, so that there are still people living in Ukraine who are protected by this leader at this time. And there are those who have either temporarily relocated or permanently. So he's shown leadership to be able to take advantage of a NATO which won't mind expanding its military presence on that corridor. It's got many countries who should be focused on their own domestic issues, granting aid from the United States to Canada to France to Germany to the EU itself. He's increased his military might as a result of only 500 days of warfare. That is what may not be achieved in a generation or in a lifetime. So how does he leave Ukraine? It's going to be one of the all-time greats of Ukraine, who these people will look at as having defended their mandate, their sovereignty as a people. So I think that we should close that with the fact that it just takes you to be human to be able to achieve greatness. The rest will fall into place and opportunities will come.
Thank you, Mr. Yenichi. I think that as well, that underestimation, possibly, of President Zelensky by President Putin is what led to some of the decisions President Putin made at the beginning of this conflict. Thanks so much for your insight and your contribution, Mr. Yin Kao Yenichi, international affairs analyst who joined us from East Midlands in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Macaulay. Have a great time.
After the break, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Russia will return to the Black Sea grain deal when its interests are upheld. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the Soul for More stretch of today's coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin has restated its position on the Black Sea grain deal, saying Moscow was ready to return to the accord that allowed for export of Ukrainian grain by sea once the part that concerns Russia was implemented. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also told reporters that President Vladimir Putin held a call on Wednesday morning with the Turkey President Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey and the United Nations brokered the Black Sea grain deal last summer. Moscow exited the deal last month, complaining that the international community had failed to ensure that Russia could also freely export its own grain and fertilizer as part of that deal. The U.S. envoy to the United Nations said earlier this week that there were indications that Russia might be interested in returning to discussions about the grain deal without giving further details. The United Nations has said it is working with various sides to get Ukrainian and Russian food to global markets after warnings of a potential crisis in the world's poorest countries due to Russia's decision to abandon the deal brokered by the UN and Turkey. Deputy UN President Farhan Haq told reporters in his words, "We continue to reach out at various levels to make sure we can continue to do as much as possible to get Ukrainian and Russian food and fertilizers out to the markets, but it is difficult." The Russian ruble has tumbled more than 2% to a more than 16-month low, past 94 against the dollar, pressured by political risk, falling oil prices, and concerns the finance ministry may switch to foreign currency purchases this month. On Wednesday, the ruble was 2% weaker against the dollar at 94.16. Earlier, hitting 94.32, its weakest point since March the 28th, 2022. Former Russian defense reporter Ivan Safronov told, or rather lost, his latest appeal just yesterday against a 22-year jail sentence on charges of treason. Mr. Safronov, a former reporter for the Kommersant and Velmazielinski newspaper who later worked as an advisor to the head of Russia's space agency, was arrested in 2020 and accused of disclosing classified information. He was sentenced in September last year in what his supporters called a draconian ruling that showed the absence of media freedom in Russia. He was accused of handing military secrets to the Czech Republic, a NATO member, but his defense team said the case was revenge for his journalistic reporting on Russian plans to sell fighter jets to Egypt. Safronov was transferred in February to a high-security prison in the Krasnoyarsk region of Siberia and was not present for Wednesday's Supreme Court decision in Moscow. However, his lawyer told reporters it will now be for Safronov to decide if he wanted to attempt a further appeal to the precedent of the Supreme Court. To the business side of things, the largest port in Poland has started receiving fertilizers for Ukraine. Our business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa, is here with me to bring some light to that disclosure. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, is this through the alternative routes that they got this fertilizer to Poland?
So, you know, we talked about how Ukraine is looking for alternatives, obviously. So this is one of those that they have found. Of course, you know that Poland and Ukraine share a very close border, so it's easy to move things there. So Poland has helped to get this. It was received by a company, a Ukrainian company, but at the port of Poland, and it's coming from Morocco. That's where they are getting this from. So obviously we know that Russia is a major supplier, global supplier of fertilizer and the materials used to make fertilizer. So obviously Ukraine is looking outside now to get alternatives. And this is obviously one of it.
Okay, this is importation of fertilizer to Ukraine.
To Ukraine, to help in their agriculture.
Right,
yes,
since
so
they can't get it from Russia anymore.
Exactly.
Therefore,
yeah, so they have to look for, and since they can't get it through the Black Sea, which is a major route for them to always both export and import of materials, of crops and things like that. So they
after this war, Ukraine and Poland have to do a best friends forever thing. Maybe get
like Belarus and Russia.
Maybe get identical rings or something.
I don't know about
that. Because they're also the ones who have offered for that Polish route to be the place where the land exportation of the grain will happen as a substitute for the Black Sea, as well as Bulgaria and other places. They've offered for that, to grant them passage, obviously because of the fact that it's too low in volume is why it's not such a great idea.
And you know, we talked about how the use of road and rail, because it has not been developed over time, is very time consuming and very costly compared to, you know, what they used to use, which was the Black Sea before. So, I mean, it's just them trying to find a way, and especially at this time when we see Russia intentionally targeting the facilities, infrastructure that holds grain and help farmers in Ukraine. This is very much needed because the world also needs the grain that is coming from Ukraine, and also Ukrainians also need the revenue coming from there. Don't forget there's still people there, they still need revenue and all of that. So it is a success. It might not be as big as what we want, you know, but it just makes me think that why can we not just use the Black Sea?
Let me chip in there before you go in that direction. The farmers of Ukraine have been hailed for their bravery. Because this grain is coming from somewhere. It's coming from the farmers.
It's coming from the farmers.
They are farming in spite of the security risk
of
farming.
Landmines and all of that.
And they're still farming. So I think that's a great plus. One of our analysts mentioned this someday on this program, that the farmers are indeed to be celebrated. That is the Ukrainian farmers for continuing, in spite of the tide that is against them, to continue to bring the products out. But that's just the job half done.
It's the job half done because part of those land cannot be accessed at the risk of landmines. In fact, some time ago, we talked about the issue of the cattle. You know, they also do a lot of milking and all of that. And that has also been threatened. But of course, they're just trying to work with what they have. And I mean, it's a good point you brought that out, because we just keep saying, oh, what about the routes to get the grains out? But what about the source of that grain? Obviously, there are some people out there who are still going to the farm, who are still processing it, because they have to harvest it and process it before, you know, it can be sent out of the country. And I mean, it also says a whole lot about the level of development of Ukraine or its agricultural sector. In fact, generally, because if it was not very developed, then these threats would have obviously shut it down totally. And it also says a lot about the spread of development. So in a country like Nigeria, if you're talking of the commercial capital, commercial and corporate headquarters, you're talking of Lagos. If Lagos, anything happens in Lagos, it affects the country. But in this area, in this country, that's Ukraine, we can see that it's not just maybe in Kyiv or in Danube. You have a lot of parts, a lot of the regions developed, and they have this equipment. Obviously, they're not doing subsistence farming, or else we're going to be talking about exporting grains and all of that. So it seems like an equitable development that's taking place in that country. You understand? That's why they're still able to, in spite of the strikes, in spite of the areas that have been affected, the major cities have been affected and overtaken and all of that, and they're still able to produce grain. So it's a very good point that you brought up there about the resilience of the farmers and the agricultural sector.
Indeed. You mentioned Russian oil trading above the price cap.
So we know that the EU had placed a $60 price cap on Russian oil, and it's not supposed to go above that because they're trying to tighten revenue going into Russia. But we do know that Russia, too, they had woken up to cut their production in collaboration with Saudi Arabia, and cutting production, tighten supply, and increases prices. Like this morning, we saw Brent at $83, WTI, that's the one from the United States, at $79. Obviously, these are above. And then with the tightening that we have been seeing, you know, it seems like some oil buyers are desperate enough to still go for Russian oil, even when it is above the $60. Because look at the price, 60 to 80 for Brent, for instance.
Okay.
That's about $20 for 1 barrel of oil. That's a whole lot. So it just says that demand is increasing, and when demand is increasing, then buyers just get desperate and be like, oh, let me risk it. Is it Russian oil? Can I buy it at 65? Can I buy it at 70? You know, so we see them do that. So the question now is, what about the enforcement of it? Who is going to focus to enforce the sanctions, or the 60, the EU, and say, okay, you are going to get sanctioned, or you must buy Russian oil at $60 for a barrel? Who is going to do that when everybody's busy trying to keep their economy uptick, you know, and keep people there feeding and reduce energy costs and fight inflation? Who's going to do it?
Good question. But the ship, the Russian oil ship detained in Belgium, obviously the Russians are used to this by now. That is the sanctions happening. But for the Russian oil ship to be detained in Belgium, I'm sure they'll have something to say about it. Yeah, they'll have something to say about it. But I mean, if Brussels say that when Russian oil is not supposed to be in this ship, is not supposed to go through this route because of the sanctions, or if they have seen the ship company or insurance company that have, and guess how they got to know about this? They said it was an unusual, investigation. So obviously somebody tipped them off. It's not, I think the ship contains about 210,000 barrels of Russian crude and all of that. And it was supplying Belgium when it shouldn't happen? It was going through Belgium. Through Belgium. Yes, that it shouldn't have been. I mean, you're not supposed to buy Russian oil and all of that. So it was an EU investigator, EU group that discovered it. But how did they know that it's actually Russian oil? So somebody has tipped them off. And it also says, suggests, let me know, it says that this is not the first time it's happening. It's just the first time it's being caught. You know, we talked about indirect purchase of Russian oil and energy and gas in spite of the sanctions, even by the EU. And, you know, the other way also, we see Russians also buying some of the things from the EU, either knowingly or unknowingly, but through a third party, you know. So it's a difficult situation for the world. It's a difficult situation for those who are putting up the sanctions, those who are going to enforce the sanctions, and of course Russia itself. And that's why Russia seems to be looking for other ways to breathe, even Ukraine, in the midst of the war. Ukraine is gathering evidence to prosecute Russia. Yeah. There are a number of war crimes that they accuse Russia of in that neighborhood, 98,000 to that degree. This evidence that they're trying to gather against Russia, is this in the way of business? It's in the way of survival, I guess. Right. So, Olumide, I know you're good with these names. I've been trying to pronounce this name for a bit. Let me see if I've not been able to. D-Z-H-A-R-I. I've been trying. It's a beautiful island, you know, in Ukraine, close to the Black Sea. And I saw the videos, and it's so beautiful. I can give an educated guess. Okay, please. Zarelgach. Olumide, I said you're either Russian or Ukrainian. You have to choose. So this island, it's a protected island. It's a beautiful island. It's a place that people used to go, and you have a lot of shrimps because of the water, you know, and people just spend time there, very calm and all of that. Now, Ukraine is saying that Russia has been occupying that island since they invaded the country, and because it's close to, around the Crimea, and it's close to the Black Sea, so it was easy for Russia to, you know, get into there. And that's where they've been doing their training. That's where they've been keeping their arms and all of that. And with all the chemical and human activity, that place has now been destroyed. So all the sea life, all the freshness and everything that tourists and even resident Ukrainians used to go there for have been destroyed because of the war. So remember how we talked about Ukraine saying that
they are looking for evidence and legal means to seize some of Russia's assets.
Yes.
You understand, to use it for the. So these are part of the evidence that they're gathering.
So the flora and the fauna of that area have been destroyed because of the Russian invasion.
Yes.
This is part of what Zelensky, president, was talking about, ecocide,
Yeah,
ecological
exactly.
genocide,
Yeah.
and it also brings up a whole new conversation where the wildlife in these areas are being destroyed and creatures are being wiped out. We don't know how much fish have been destroyed.
Yeah.
We don't know how much wildlife has been destroyed. We talk about the human beings, but they're also the creatures that God created in his good green earth that have been destroyed by this, being affected, displaced in many parts by this conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Don't forget that those things, apart from the environmental damage in the ecosystem, and it used to be a source of revenue for a lot of Ukrainians.
Right.
You have Ukrainians who are into tourism, who used to use that area and make it, habitable for tourists, attract tourists and tourist activities. And now they have also, of course, lost their homes and lost their source of livelihood.
Yeah.
So this is part of the evidence that Ukraine is trying to gather against Russia for, I don't know which court it will end up in, because we remember we talked about the International Court of Justice and they said that they don't really have laws covering ecosystem and environmental issues. But I mean, who knows what will develop tomorrow? It'll
depend how the war ends. If it ends via treaty, or if it ends via one side totally destroying the other, then it depends. Then the whole issue of jurisdiction comes in if it ends via an armistice or a treaty or something of that nature.
Yeah, well, I think the most interesting thing you've said there is how the war ends, or the war ends.
The manner in which it ending at all.
It ending, that will give the world a whole lot of relief from food prices, the grains that are being sent, maybe not to countries like Nigeria, but to Yemen, all those countries in dire need. The issue of aid that used to be given to them have now been turned and distracted, and of course the supply have also been. So once the war ends, it's going to be good news for everybody, I believe.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Ini John Mekwa. You can join her on Business Morning after this program. Time for a break. When we return, the Medical Peace Organization calls for more protection of the Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the final stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Medical Peace Organization, IPPNW, has called for more protection of the Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Since its occupation by the Russian army in March 2022, the plant has become a weapon of war, according to them, and a pre-positioned dirty bomb. The call to enforce the demand for a non-military zone around the plant was directed to the member states of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Angelika Clausen, Vice President of the IPPNW Europe, added the UN nuclear watchdog, IAEA, had done a good job, Clausen said, but was not sufficiently supported by the states holding the nuclear weapons themselves. A study on possible effects of a nuclear meltdown in Zaporizhzhia was commissioned by the agency and presented on the sidelines of a conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Commission.
The power plant has become a weapon of war, a pre-positioned dirty bomb, if you will, posing a danger to millions of people in Ukraine, neighboring countries, and the whole of Europe. Its security has become a bargaining chip in this war. We believe that the right to be spared from radioactive contamination should remain non-negotiable. We find it ironic that several countries which strongly support the peaceful use of nuclear energy and the nuclear energy itself have taken no stand to declare attacks on nuclear power plants off limits in wartime. This inaction threatens the future of nuclear power, since another nuclear catastrophe would deeply undercut any country's willingness to host such vulnerable facilities without a clear international agreement declaring attacks on them off limits.
these things are not communicated very, very well, I think. It's always very shy and somehow downplayed, like underestimated. And we are here now because we are in the NPT PrepCom, and we want the states, all the states, to do something. It's really necessary to act and to do something.
Another scenario which is more likely and which we have already seen is combat action on site with the aim to gain control over the site. And in this case, the weapons are not selected to destroy the nuclear power plants, but are selected to fight combatants on the site. This is a scenario we have already seen. And what we also have seen is that in such a scenario, the weapons are not that precise that they will spare all the essential parts of the nuclear power plant. So.
And those calls for more measures for the security and safety of the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia brings this edition of our coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine to a close. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. See you again. Do join us tomorrow.